wanted to get into kind of an underbelly of Vegas and to meet really people that were working in the sex trade in Vegas. I met this girl in a bar. She had a leopard print jumpsuit on with a heel platform, but, you know, it turned out she's like 5'1", but of course when you speak to her, she's like 5'7", so you don't quite, because she's wearing a heel this big. She had kind of a Betty Page hairdo, and I thought it was fabulous looking. Turned out she was working as a professional dominatrix in Vegas, which I didn't know anything about. Sounds very innocent. I mean, I had a fantasy about what it was. And she told me all these stories about how it worked and so on. And strangely enough, she actually wasn't involved with any of her customers sexually. That was what was quite interesting. It was all, she had one customer that booked her every Thursday at 2 o'clock sharp. She had to be there half an hour before. She would get into this outfit that you see here. And for 1 hour, she would blow smoke in his face. And for this, he paid her $1,000.
I've had the rare opportunity to meet many amazing photographers who move through their different landscapes to create powerful images. I'm always inspired by how these images transform the way we see people and understand the world. A great photograph needs no explanation, but on Capture, these incredible people tell the story of creating their most memorable images. I'm Mark Seliger, and this is Capture. We're here today in my studio with Lauren Bush and the great Albert Watson, one of my heroes when I was starting to take pictures.
Are you saying that I've been doing it longer than you, Mark?
Not really. I'm not saying that at all. Your amazing picture of Alfred Hitchcock, it really encapsulated what I thought a great photograph was about, which was a great portrait.
I was an LA photographer at that time, doing whatever work I could get. Anything I could make a little bit of money with, I took it. Suddenly one day there was a call on the phone, and my wife took it and said Harper's Bazaar magazine's on the phone. I remember my voice shaking when I got on the phone with them, and they said, we'd like you to photograph somebody famous. Have you photographed celebrities before? And I said, well, not really. I said, well, who is it? They said, well, it's Alfred Hitchcock. So I mean, this was 1973. By this time, I had a small studio. You know, I knew a little bit about what I was doing, but nothing of any magnitude, you know? Very few people know he's a gourmet chef. He had a special recipe for cooking goose. Do you know the expression, you cook your own goose? So I thought about it. Alfred Hitchcock cooks his own goose. And I'll have him hold it by the neck like he strangled it. I always remember when I went into Universal Studios, on my driver's license, there was drops of sweat from me because I was so nervous and shaking. He was fantastic. It was the most important shot I ever did because it was a confidence builder. At one point he started to cry and he pulled out a handkerchief and was wiping away tears because he was upset about the goose, you know. Wow. So I mean, he was completely, I mean, he was Alfred Hitchcock. If you're dealing with people and you're photographing people who know they're being photographed, this is different to reportage. Your best weapon is your own personality. As long as that person begins to feel that wave, and it doesn't have to be a celebrity, it can be somebody in the street. Once they feel that and they become comfortable, then they will open up to you.
Lauren is kind of a hidden jewel in photography. Photography actually led you to your nonprofit work that you do now.
I get so inspired in traveling, and it was with that inspiration that I wanted to capture it and bring it home and share it with others. When I was taking these trips around the world with the World Food Program and learning about hunger and poverty and wanting to do more, and part of my wanting to do more, I thought, could be to capture pictures and tell the stories of people I met in places like Africa and Asia and Latin America, developing countries.
When you're working in Africa, how do you find that window to walk into something that is so emotional and so dark and be able to record it and put on that kind of war paint and be able to just do that?
I am very aware of the fact that I'm a white, woman coming in a UN vehicle to visit villages. I always struggle with being an outsider, being a visitor. I'm never there long enough. I don't, live in one of these villages for a year. Initially with photography, I think I almost used it as a way for me to have a purpose there, beyond just going and seeing and sort of, I feel like, intruding in some ways in people's lives. They're thrilled that their lives are being documented, and they feel important from that.
This was shot where?
That was shot in Rwanda. A lot of what I do when I travel is visiting schools. So the main program we support through FEED is school feeding, which means schools in 62 of the poorest countries around the world are getting free school lunches. And often it's the school lunch that gets kids to go to school and stay in school. This shot I took out of my window as we were leaving. So part of visiting schools is you're sort of this distraction for the day, and kids, you know, clamor around you. And this school in particular was kind of unruly. And as we were leaving, they sort of stormed the car, waving and kind of trying to get another look.
But your instinct was to pick up a camera rather than to wave or
yeah,
to watch
I just thought it was,
on, which is very much about kind of being you know, on your toes and seeing a photograph come to you. And
it was just the sea of kids. It was all you could see, and that's what I wanted to capture with that. And I just got lucky because it's not something that you're, you know, posing or worrying about the light at that moment. You're just like literally rolling down the window and trying to get as many kids as you can.
And, I mean, I think you can always think about that later.
Yeah.
You know, but don't think about that first. Because if you think about it first, the shot's gone. Mark and I have a great advantage and disadvantage. The advantage is that we've been doing this a long, long time now, and we've become, I can't think of a better word, sophisticated photographers. So therefore, if all these blinds go up and there's daylight, Mark can shoot in it. If it's with a, you know, with a strobe light or an HMI light, it doesn't matter, because you can work with all these things. The disadvantage is there's a loss of innocence. The picture becomes more powerful, more sophisticated, more iconic, some ways more memorable, and so on. The nice thing about someone that hasn't gone through that process is there is a spontaneous, natural thing that you do that you see, you shoot.
It's part of the journey, right? That your job is photographing somebody iconic and to do what you consider to be the best photograph that can be taken of that person. This is an amazing, iconic photograph of Christy Turlington, which is probably one of the best known photographs, if not the best known photograph of her.
At the time I took it, she loved it. You always have to remember, if you take a picture of Paul McCartney in '67, then he's with the Beatles in '67, the picture's '67, he's got a certain look, he's got a certain amount of, it was taken in 1967. The idea is that your stopping time, it's an incredibly important thing. And at that time, Christy smoked cigarettes. She doesn't smoke now, of course not. She's very healthy now and still looks amazing. But of course it bothered her that this picture became well known and that she was smoking.
What I love about your prints is that, you know, you want to touch them. There's like a texture to them. There's a dimensionality to them that I just think they're, you know, it's unprecedented.
I always thought it was very, very, very important that you printed your own things for obvious reasons. You could look at a picture and say, I think I'd like it darker. No, I think I'd like it lighter. I think I'd like the sky richer. I think I'd like the person's face whiter. It's always your choice because it's your picture. And the idea that somebody else takes your picture, they can be the best printer in the world, but not necessarily the best printer of your work. Avedon didn't print his own things. And you can actually tell. Helmut Newton didn't, and you can actually tell, but Irving Penn did. And when you look at the prints, as we know, Irving Penn's prints are better than Avedon's prints and also Helmut Newton's prints. Now, the photography is a different story. I'm not saying the photography is better, I'm just saying the printing's better.
Which is what we signed up for.
You know, my son, when he was, I think he was like 7, he said, oh my God, I could never be a photographer. I said, why not? He said, the smell in this darkroom, he said, is just is awful. He said, I would be ill in here. And of course, I was used to being in a darkroom 12 hours, like you, Mark. And to me, I go in the morning, you know, what was it, Apocalypse Now, the smell of napalm in the morning, the smell of the developer in the morning and the fixer and all that, acetic acid, mixing it and so on, was magic.
This is an amazing photograph.
What you're seeing is just 2 levels of the structure that goes sky high of all these skulls of people who were literally killed, and it's where they would take Cambodians and systematically just kill. And really they would start with the most intellectuals first and just obliterated a lot of the population. What's left there is just a field and this big structure with all these skulls. Definitely one of the most haunting thing I've ever seen.
It shows your fierceness in being able to address that kind of documentary work.
I felt that it had to come home with a reminder, although, you know, that's not a picture that I have framed and hung above my bed. This picture is of a little girl in Cambodia, and it was in a big trash dump. She was one of many kids I saw picking through the garbage, and this was their day-to-day job, essentially, just to survive and provide for their families. But the hopeful thing, which I pray to God for her, right next to this dump is a school that a French family came and saw the conditions and started the school. They literally go into the dump every day and they pull kids out of the dump and bring them into the school. And the kids there have uniforms and they, you know, get a meal again every day or two, and often even are boarding at the school.
Albert, you've done a lot of pictures and spent a lot of time in Morocco.
The first time I went to Morocco was '79. And then I went back a third or fourth time at the early 90s. I bought a piece of land and then I built a huge house. Just as I was building the house, I got a call from the Prince of Morocco, who's now the king, and he wanted me to do a book on Morocco. And he said, I want you to be completely free, you can do what you want as long as you're in Morocco. He gave me his plane, so I had a jet to go all over Morocco.
Can we still get that jet?
It's still working, I think. For 34 days, 32 days, I shot all over Morocco, and I did a book for him. The book was called Morocco. This is one of the shots from that, from the book.
Beautiful. There.
And it was shot in Essaouira, which is not in Marrakesh. Essaouira is on the coast of Morocco, and it's a white city, as opposed to Marrakesh, which is a pink city.
With the book stuff, you seem to start it with a destination.
One thing that's helped me gigantically, whether it's in Benin or whether it's like a project like this, the film school experience enabled me to plan jobs and to have an idea that if you come into Morocco to do a story, you can't cover everything, but what are you going to focus on? What's the project? And I wanted it to be like a cahier, a diary, and I began producing cyanotype prints, and then I got the idea of buying all these old papers that I could use. There were skins, basically, and I began doing cyanotype prints and platinum prints right onto these ancient papers. So the book was produced in analog form. It was not produced digitally. So I was able to pull together everything. So filmmaking experience, printing, being in a dark room, and it was a successful project. Lauren, tell me about this picture.
This was actually taken in a refugee camp in Chad, a Sudanese refugee camp. So this little guy is being weighed, but the way they weigh babies around the world is using a meat hanger. And babies hate it. As you can see, this little guy's wailing, and his, you know, dad's kind of trying to calm him. You know, and it's wonderful that he's being weighed. It's sort of a violent thing though, because you're, you know, literally hooking him onto this meat hanger. I went to Chad, Lesotho, and Tanzania doing research for my thesis and taking pictures, but going to refugee camp, that was a different world, because it's not a camp, it's like a village. It's a tented, massive village, and you drive, you know, through the desert, and there's different tents with different purposes, and this was the tent, which is good because there are, you know, once people make it to the camps, which is a horrible scenario that they even have to flee their homes to go there, but they're given food and medical services. So kids are weighed, you know, every few months to make sure they're growing properly and they're charted, you know, as we all were charted throughout our childhood. So it's a hopeful thing actually, but it looks quite violent, and kids always really scream and hate the scenario.
When I was asked to shoot a portfolio for Rolling Stone in '92 for their 25th anniversary, I was shaking in my boots that I was gonna share pages with you. Walking into Jodi's office and seeing your picture of Mick Jagger, I just was cross-eyed. I couldn't believe how incredible it was.
The funny thing about the Mick Jagger picture, I would love to say that it was planned weeks in advance and I had this idea and so on. That wasn't actually meant to be the shot. And the shot that I had set up was on Sunset Boulevard. It was a Corvette convertible, you know, the top down. When we actually got to the studio that was our starting point, it turned out that the Leopard was a little bit on the dangerous side. because I know you know a little bit about wild animals too, but cheetahs are actually manageable, but leopards are more dangerous, like lions. Lions can be unpredictable. I worked with all these animals.
And chimps.
And I'm an expert with chimps. Chimps can be dangerous too.
They'll tear your face off.
Really?
The strange thing about a chimp is their arms look about skinny like this. When they get a grip of you and pull you, you know the strength. So anyway, there I was with the leopard that was too dangerous. So what we had to do was, we were going to build a partition in the car between the leopard and Jagger, so the leopard couldn't get to him. Because every time Jagger went near this leopard, the leopard went for him. So as they were building this with gaffer's tape and apple boxes and trying to make it work, I said to Mick, let me do so we're working, doing something, let me do a quick portrait of you. And then I thought, you know what, why don't we do a portrait of the leopard first, you know? And what I'll do is, I'll take a China marker, a marker, and I did the portrait of the leopard, but I drew the leopard's face onto the viewfinder of the camera. And I did the eyes and the nose where the mouth was and so on. And then I rewound the film, and I put Jagger in, and then made an adjustment forward and backward, and I fitted him into where the leopard was.
I do know this picture.
Right.
Amazing.
And then
yeah. I
went ahead and shot it, and one roll of film, of course, and then the car was ready. And I remember having it in my hand, I thought, well, that's what a waste of time that was, because I just realized then that I had destroyed the portrait of Jagger by doing this double exposure thing. And I almost didn't process the roll of film. And then the remarkable thing was that when we got back and the film came back in, the guy from the lab called me and said, how did you get those shots, you know? And it turned out of the 12 frames, 4 of them were perfectly synced.
Wow.
They just matched perfectly, and he fitted perfectly into the leopard. It wasn't planned, it was just almost spontaneous, but technically worked out a little bit on the spot.
Cool.
And afterwards, there was a funny story, because he had approval of the shot. So he was out in LA still, and we sent the shot out to him, and he saw it, and he said, oh, I love it, it's great. So it was approved. I sent it over to Jan, and then the next morning when I got into the studio, there were all these calls that came in from Jagger. I thought, oh, he's changed his mind, you know, what a drag. And he said, do not send that shot to Jan. Do not send it to him. He said, I want to use it as an album cover, because he was doing his first single kind of album cover. And I said, it's too late. I sent it over, and he was furious. And then I called Jan and said, Jan, can we use the other shot of him? And he said, not a chance. You know, Jan said, not a chance. Forget it.
What inspires you for your next subject? What will be your next subject, do you think?
I guess it depends on where I travel next. And I do really, I have to say, when I was in school studying photography, I was more actively shooting. So it's something I love and I need to do more of on a day-to-day basis, not just when I'm going somewhere sort of exotic or strange.
I always say the same thing. If I'm doing landscape work, and I'm doing landscape work for 2 weeks, which I've done, you know, for a Scottish whiskey company, something like that, and you're completely free, you do landscape work, then I'm loving every minute of it. But after 2 weeks, I'm looking for a human being. And then if I'm with a human being in the studio, I'm very happy about that, but then somebody says, you know, we're going to do some stuff outside in a natural environment, then I'm happy with that. So therefore, I don't know if I have a favorite place. My favorite place is not the last place in a weird way. You know, now it's silly because you say, well, what about the studio? Because then you really stop. The studio is so neutral, it's not really part of that. The Benin project, I enjoyed being there. That was a very nice experience for me. It was strange for me. And I think some of the things you were saying about being in Africa and what the problem is of what you were. Of course, I turned up with a whole crew, which is even worse than you being on your, you know, you at least are naturally on your own. I turn up and I've got a whole crew with me with lights and everything. So, but the favorite place I think is wherever the next place is. The one thing I think that is interesting is the interplay of 1 week doing advertising or editorial projects which are under a certain degree of pressure, to say the least, and the next week you're on your own, and how the two interplay. I think that...
Yeah, how do you switch your mind to
that is...
your own?
But does the advertising work, does the pressure of the advertising work, the perfection of the advertising work, the editorial, the finish, the pressure of photographing Bruce Springsteen in 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe, you know, whatever to get the shot. That all of that pressure that you're under there, how does that help you with your own personal work, which of course it does.
I guess that's kind of wraps things up. Thank you guys so much for coming over and spend some time. I'm here with the master Albert Watson and
Mark, thank you for the invitation.
incredible Lauren Bush of Feed, and it's great to have you.
Anytime.
It was a pleasure. Somebody asked me the other day, who was the worst, most difficult? Did you ever photograph anything that was horrible? And I said, I did, Chuck Berry.
Oh.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he was
Really?
rough.
He was just a jerk. I mean, I can't think of any, he was just horrible. And I told him to his face, I said, he was almost going to hit me. I said, you know, for years, I said, you changed my life. I mean, I said, I was such a fan of what you did. It was so original and so on. And I said, I was so looking forward. I said, but you treated me so badly. I told him to his face like that.
Really?
Wow.
And he
good
said,
for
that's
you.
life, you know, or something. I said, hey, listen, fair enough.
Do you ever wonder what it would be like to quit your job and live a life you've always dreamed of?
A bad day in the islands still beats a good day in the office.
Join me, Savannah Jane Buffett, as I head to St. Croix to meet Nate Olive, an expat from Atlanta who moved down here to follow his passion of running a sustainable farm in paradise, and in the meantime met the woman of his dreams.
What really made me a Virgin Islander was when I married Shelley.
You're really living the expat dream.
Paradise, I believe, is like what you make of it. My advice to expats, don't live on a place, live in a place.
This is it, man. This is the life.
Yeah!